It was a rainy Thursday evening in the middle of July when everything shifted. Tabena had traveled to Port Harcourt for a 3-day work conference, and I had a late marketing event at a hotel on Ozumbambadu Avenue that ran until almost 10 o'clock at night. Emeka waited outside for me the entire time, even though I had told him he could go home and rest. When I finally walked out into the rain, exhausted and a little frustrated after a stressful evening, he was standing by the car with an umbrella, waiting patiently without complaint. Something about that small act of patience broke something open in me. On the drive home, instead of going straight to the estate, we stopped at a quiet spot near the Lekki Ikoyi link bridge, where the city lights reflected on the water below. We sat in the car and talked for almost an hour, not about work or errands, but about our lives, our disappointments, our hidden dreams. He told me he thought I was one of the strongest women he had ever met. I told him I had not felt truly seen by anyone in a very long time. And then, in a moment I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times since, he reached over and held my hand, and I did not pull away. I remember the guilt hitting me immediately, sharp and cold, even as my heart was pounding with something I had not felt in years. I told myself it was just one moment, that nothing else would happen, that I would go home and forget this ever occurred. But deep inside, I already knew that something inside me had shifted, and that this was only the beginning of a mistake that would grow far bigger than I ever intended. I wish I could tell you that I stopped things right there, that I went home, prayed about it, and closed that door forever. But the truth is much harder to admit. Over the following weeks, small moments turned into longer ones. A hand on mine turned into stolen glances in the rearview mirror, and stolen glances turned into quiet text messages that I deleted immediately after reading. I told myself I was still in control, that I was simply enjoying a friendship that made me feel alive again, but deep down I knew I was lying to myself. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living 2 lives at once, smiling at your husband over dinner while your phone buzzes quietly in your pocket with a message from someone else, tucking your children into bed while your mind wanders to a conversation you had earlier that day in the car. I became someone I did not recognize, someone who checked her makeup before morning drives, someone who found small excuses to stay in the car a few minutes longer than necessary. Tabena, buried in his work and completely trusting of me, noticed nothing unusual. My best friend, Ngozi, who I met every Sunday after church at a small restaurant called Sweet Sensation on Admiralty Way, began to notice a change in me though. She said I seemed distracted, lighter somehow, but also strangely nervous. I brushed off her concerns, laughing it away, telling her I was just tired from work. But guilt has a way of sitting quietly in your chest, waiting for the right moment to explode, and mine was growing heavier every single day, even as I told myself I could keep everything perfectly hidden forever. The afternoon it finally happened was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that gives no warning of the disaster waiting inside it. Tabena had gone to Abuja for a 2-day project review, and the children were spending the night at my mother's house in Surulere for their cousin's birthday celebration. I had told Emeka I did not need him to drive that evening, but he came anyway, saying he wanted to check something on the car's engine before Tabena returned. We ended up sitting in the parked car outside my empty apartment for almost 2 hours, talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that slowly erases every boundary you swore you would never cross. I remember the silence that fell between us at one point, heavy and charged, neither of us saying what we were both thinking. I remember looking at him and feeling a mixture of fear and longing that frightened me more than anything ever had. What happened next is something I have struggled to explain even to myself. It was not planned, it was not something either of us set out to do, but somewhere in that silence, we crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Afterward, sitting alone in my quiet bedroom once he had gone, I felt something I did not expect. I did not feel excitement or relief. I felt an overwhelming, crushing wave of shame that made it hard to breathe. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my wedding photo on the dresser, at Tabena's smiling face, and I understood for the first time exactly what I had done and exactly what I stood to lose. I told myself it would never happen again. I told myself I would carry this secret quietly to my grave and protect my family from the pain of ever knowing. I had no idea that secrets in a house that's small, in a life that intertwined, rarely stay buried for long. In the days that followed, I threw myself into being the perfect wife and mother, as if kindness and attentiveness could somehow undo what had already happened. I cooked Tabena's favorite dishes, jollof rice with extra pepper the way he liked it. I helped Chitra with her homework every evening. I even surprised Kalechi with the toy car he had been asking for weeks. But no matter how hard I tried to bury my guilt under good behavior, it kept rising back to the surface at the strangest moments, when Tabena kissed my forehead before leaving for work, when he called me during his lunch break just to hear my voice, when he told his colleagues proudly that I was the best thing that ever happened to him. Every kind word from him felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I told Emeka clearly that what happened between us could never happen again, that I loved my husband and I refused to destroy my family. He seemed to accept this quietly, though something in his eyes told me he was not entirely convinced it was truly over. For almost a month, things returned to a strange kind of normal. Emeka remained professional, respectful, careful never to overstep. I began to believe, foolishly, that I had escaped the consequences of my mistake completely. But guilt does not simply disappear because you decide to ignore it, and secrets do not stay hidden forever, especially not in a phone that still held traces of messages I thought I had deleted, and a heart that still carried the memory of choices I could never fully take back. I had no idea that Tabena, quiet and trusting as he was, had already started noticing small things that did not add up, tiny cracks in the story I had carefully built to protect myself. Looking back now, I realized Tabena had been quietly gathering pieces of a puzzle for weeks before that terrible night. He mentioned, almost casually one evening while we were eating dinner, that Emeka had returned the car with more fuel used than usual on a day I told him I had stayed home all afternoon. I laughed it off, saying maybe Emeka had run a personal errand, and Tabena nodded and let it go, though I noticed a small flicker of doubt cross his face that I chose to ignore. A week later, he asked why my phone was always face down on tables, why I had started taking it into the bathroom with me, why I flinched slightly whenever it buzzed unexpectedly. I told him he was imagining things, that work stress was simply making him anxious, and I hated myself even as the lies left my mouth so easily. What I did not know was that Tabena had quietly begun asking his sister Ifeoma questions about Emeka, and that Ifeoma, without realizing the weight of what she was doing, mentioned that her own driver had once seen Emeka's car parked outside our estate at unusual hours. That single comment planted a seed of suspicion in Tabena's mind that grew heavier with every passing day. He said nothing to me directly, choosing instead to watch quietly, to notice patterns, to piece together a story I had tried so desperately to hide. I had convinced myself I was safe, that my secret was buried deep enough to never resurface, but I did not yet understand that the man I married was far more observant than I had given him credit for, and that the storm I had been dreading was already gathering just beyond the horizon, waiting for the right moment to break. That Thursday night, the one I mentioned at the very beginning of this story, started like any other evening. Tabena had come home early from work, quieter than usual, and I remember feeling a strange unease in the air that I could not quite explain. After the children went to bed, he sat across from me at the dining table, his phone placed face down in front of him, his eyes tired in a way I had never seen before. He asked me calmly, almost too calmly, whether there was anything I needed to tell him. My heart dropped into my stomach, but I forced a smile and asked what he meant. That was when he turned his phone around and showed me a message thread between myself and Emeka, messages I thought I had deleted months ago, messages that Ifeoma's driver had somehow forwarded screenshots of after noticing Emeka behaving strangely around our family. I felt the room spin around me as Tabena asked me one simple question, his voice breaking slightly. He asked if it was true. I remember opening my mouth to deny it, to explain it away, but no words came out, because looking into his eyes, I understood that more lies would only make everything worse. I nodded slowly, tears streaming down my face, and admitted everything, every secret meeting, every text message, every moment of weakness I had tried so hard to hide. Tabena did not shout. He did not throw anything or storm out of the house. He simply sat there in silence for a long moment, staring at the table, before standing up quietly and walking into our bedroom, closing the door gently behind him. That silence was somehow more painful than any argument could have been, because in that quiet, closed door, I understood that I might have just lost the only man I had ever truly loved, and I had absolutely no idea what would happen when morning came. I still remember the sound of my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter at 11:47 p.m., and I still remember how my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it twice before I could read the message. My name is Amara, I am 32 years old, and on that night, standing alone in my kitchen in Lekki, Lagos, I found out that my husband had seen the messages between me and Emeka, the man who used to drive us to work every single morning. My husband's name is Tebena, and the message he sent me that night had only 4 words: "We need to talk." Those 4 words felt heavier than anything anyone had ever said to me in my whole life. I remember sliding down against the kitchen cabinet until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, holding my phone against my chest like it could protect me from what was coming. I kept asking myself the same question over and over again. How did I let this happen? How did a simple car ride turn into something that could destroy my marriage, my family, and the life I had spent 8 years building with the only man I ever truly loved? But before I tell you what happened that night, and before I tell you whether my marriage survived what I did, let me take you back to the beginning, because nothing about this story is as simple as it looks. Before we continue, I want to quickly say something. My name is David, and I am the one bringing you this story today. I promise you, this is one of those stories where the ending will completely change how you feel about everything you just heard, so please stay with me until the very end. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell me which country or city you are watching from right now. I always love seeing where our viewers come from. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 8 years before that terrible night, I married Tebena in a small church on Awolowo Road in Ikoyi, surrounded by our families and close friends. I remember standing at the altar, looking into his eyes, and feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Tebena was kind, hardworking, and gentle in a way that made me feel safe. He worked as an engineer for an oil company, and I worked as a marketing manager for a growing fashion brand in Victoria Island. From the outside, our life looked like something out of a magazine. We had a beautiful 3-bedroom apartment, 2 lovely children, Chidera who was 6 and Kalechi who was 4, and a routine that felt comfortable, even if it had grown a little quiet over the years. But somewhere between the school runs, the work deadlines, and the endless family obligations, Tebena and I had slowly stopped really talking to each other. We still shared a bed, we still shared meals, but we had stopped sharing our hearts. He worked longer hours as his company expanded into new projects, sometimes not coming home until after the children were already asleep. I told myself this was normal, that every marriage goes through seasons like this, and that things would get better once his workload settled down. I did not realize how much I was starving for attention, for conversation, for someone to simply ask me how my day was and actually wait to hear the answer. I did not know that this quiet emptiness inside me was slowly creating space for something dangerous to walk in, and that something came in the form of a man named Emeka, who started driving for our family 3 months before everything changed. Emeka came into our lives through a simple recommendation from my sister-in-law, Ifeoma, who said he had driven for her family for 2 years without a single problem. He was 29 years old, quiet at first, always dressed neatly, and he treated our old silver Toyota Camry like it belonged to him. His job was simple: drop me at my office on Adeola Odiku Street every morning, pick up the children from Grange School in Ikoyi in the afternoon, and sometimes drive Tebena to late meetings when his own car was in the workshop. In the beginning, Emeka and I barely spoke beyond good morning and thank you. But mornings have a strange way of making people talk, especially when Lagos traffic on 3rd Mainland Bridge decides to stretch a 20-minute drive into almost 2 hours. Slowly, our silence turned into small conversations. He told me about his mother in Owerri who raised him alone after his father passed away. I told him about my dream of one day opening my own boutique. He laughed easily, and he listened in a way that made me feel like my words actually mattered to someone. I did not think anything of it at first, because I told myself he was simply a friendly, respectful young man doing his job well. But there is a particular kind of danger in a man who listens carefully to a woman who feels unheard at home, because attention, even innocent attention, can feel like water to someone who has been quietly thirsty for a very long time. I did not see the danger then. I only saw a kind stranger who made my mornings a little less lonely, and I had no idea that this small comfort would eventually lead me somewhere I never imagined I would go.